Indie Game Garden.
Nic Tringali is a game designer and director at Bithell Games, an independent game studio that specializes in sci-fi stories. Nic works at Bithell's Lunar division label. They are most known for the Banished Vault, Wick Hex, and Sundogs, and have a particular interest in science fiction, tabletop, and analog designs, and rich interactions between players and game systems. Nic's most recent game, Amberspire, came out on Steam on May 6th. It's a science fantasy, dice-based city builder in which players are tasked with constructing buildings, managing resources, and building in harmony with an alien ecology atop the ruins of an abandoned moon. It's an honor to have Nic on the show today to talk more about Amberspire and their perspective on making indie games.
My name's Nic. I'm a designer and director at Bithell Games. I've been working full time in games for about 10 years ish now, mostly as like a programmer and designer, and I don't know. I don't know. It's like an artistic practice that I feel like I'm pretty good at, so I like doing it, and that's why I work in it.
Yeah, and what kind of first drew you to games? Was it something you did growing up, or maybe came to later on?
Yeah, I grew up with some games. Mostly for like my age was like some N64 games, and then like early Xbox stuff. It wasn't something I thought about too much, but I don't know. It sort of just like grew into the idea of, I don't know, having like kind of an ego and be like, I can make a game. I have ideas that other people aren't doing, and then spent a long time, I don't know, working and figuring that out, that kind of thing. It's not really, it's something I enjoy greatly, but it wasn't like a, childhood dream or anything, in that sense.
Yeah, and did you study like coding and game design in school, or was it something you did on the side? What was kind of the path?
No, I just, like taught myself in like the sense of like, oh, had friends that knew programming, and so they would, teach me things or whatever, and then, then made like, I my first shipped game is called Sundogs, which I released in 2015, and that was just like kind of getting my feet wet with programming and figuring all that kind of thing out.
Nice. Cool. Well, tell me more about the origins of your design philosophy. It's obvious from games like Amberspire and the Banished Vault that you have a facility with like management sims and city builders, particularly inspired with like TTRPG elements, at least that I noticed. So I'd love to hear more about kind of what's behind that.
Yeah, it's not, I don't think it's like a conscious decision so much. Like I play a lot of board games. I play like a small amount of TTRPGs, and I feel like part of what goes into the Banished Vault and Amberspire is the idea that like there's a lot of ways that board games express meaning through systems in a sense, right? So like, I don't know what board games you've played specifically, but like some of my favorite ones are like Dune 1979, which is like a strategy game, but really captures the like feel of the books, the like political kind of intrigue of the books. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. And so that kind of mentality of like using kind of simple systems to express certain ideas about, I don't know, like a fictional world basically is what I'm pulling from like a board game or a TTRPG sense. But I also have a like, I don't know, like a broader idea, or not that sounds like I'm the only one that has this idea, but like I like thinking about games more than just like video games, right? And like thinking about, like miniature war games or folk games or whatever. And so I try and think of games in a more holistic sense and then bring in ideas from there. But yeah, mostly board games, I guess, is kind of what I've been doing lately.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. in playing Amberspire myself, and particularly this was driven home to me with some of the kind of reviews I've seen and dug into on Steam. I feel like a lot of people really appreciate the elements that you have put work into simulating, or thinking about like randomness regarding. So like weather
Yeah.
dice, for instance, is something
Yeah.
that keep coming up as that I see people praising. And I was wondering like how you view randomness in games and like representing randomness, and if you've found like a way that you find best represents randomness, or if there's different ways to represent it for different genres, particularly because I know you're interested in storytelling alongside your
Yeah.
design.
Randomness is like a really subtle tool to work with that I don't think I've like got a full grasp on. There is a blog I think you'd have to like find on the Internet Archive by a wargame designer called Rachel Simmons, and she writes this blog about how dice work in war games. And it's like basically, you're in World War II, you've got a guy shooting at another guy. You, to a certain degree, don't want to simulate like the bullet's gravity or like air density, or if the guy got a full night's rest and has like is a full, like all these like intangible details that in real life are like tracked by the universe. You, in a war game, you would just say, well, you roll some dice, and everything below whatever level of simulation, maybe you have some numbers that make the die roll better or worse or whatever, but everything below this like level of simulation is just randomness. And that was like the first, I read this like several years ago, and that was like the first, I think, time I like really came to grips with the idea of like randomness as a tool to like specifically say, like in the real world now, like we have a pretty good handle on how weather works, but it's not perfect. And it like, I think mathematically it will never be perfect. So to some degree, it feels random within a certain set of outcomes, right? And I think that as well, like the way it works in Amberspire is, building rolls dice to present resources for you to use in the city. All that is saying is, well, are the workers there skilled or unskilled? Are they sick, or is there some other factor going on? For whatever reason, a furnace produced scrap instead of metal for you today, right? That is what the like core thing that the dice are like telling the player. And then when it gets to video games, it's really interesting because I think a lot of players are used to being a little suspicious of randomness in games. Everyone's played, or if you played like XCOM, you kind of get the sneaking feeling like, oh, this 85% is gonna be a hit, right? Because like it's usually fine, and then and then you kind of can know, or you kind of had this like sneaking feeling that the game is lying to you a little bit, but in like for a fun way. It's kind of like giving you a little bit of a tailwind. And for the Banished Vault, which is like kind of a horror-ish strategy game about exploring space, the dice are all like physically simulated, in that they're like physics cubes being like rolled around a cup, right? And so what I'm like communicating to the player, what the game's communicating to the player, is that this is truly like the result you get, right? There's no invisible kind of nudge to make things harder or easier, because you're in like this uncaring universe that is, out to destroy you, doesn't even care what's going on, right? And so with Amberspire, I just kind of kept that same idea of like, no, it's like, here's the world. It's a little bit impartial to what you're doing, as opposed to a more cinematic XCOM kind of thing, which is like totally fine, right? And so I think a lot of people coming to these games have some baggage with like other randomization elements, or they perceive randomization as like, oh, it's taking away something that I like worked for or whatever, and as perceived as like a negative idea. Whereas, especially for Amberspire, the weather and the way that residents grow and all of the different random elements, I see them more as kind of like an element of co-creation of the city with the player, right? So you're placing buildings, you're telling the residents when to going to the city but not where. The weather is like putting pressure on you and destroying buildings and that kind of thing, and the events are doing random things. All of those feed into all of those elements, and the player feed into the idea of like what a city is, right? And that's, I think some people will definitely pick up on that, and other people just like, I'm upset there's ice, which is fine. You can be upset.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about, like you mentioned the example from the blog, which I'll try to find and include in the show notes, talking about how like all of these elements that players don't want simulated when they think about, a war game or a battle between two individuals, is kind of like, the dice is supposed to represent all of those things. And it's interesting that, our minds as humans can kind of fill in the fictional gaps as well when it comes to, like you mentioned, talking about, well, if a furnace creates scrap instead of metal today, like, oh, what happened to the worker, or like what was the maybe like work dispute that led to this being not monitored as well as usual. And I like thinking about those things.
Well, and what I want with Amberspire is not necessarily like one dice result is kind of whatever, but after you roll the furnace die 5 times and you didn't get metal at all, then it becomes more of a story of like, oh well, now the city is a little bit different because they just didn't produce metal for so long, and so I just kept having to do other things, or I spent re-rolls to get the metal and then I couldn't re-roll the weather, and so that's where that kind of story comes in.
Yeah, that's really it's cool that is the way that you have found to kind of unite the design and the story in a way that feels very like organic when playing. What are you most excited about sharing with people when you think about Amberspire now being out in the wild?
I'm most excited to see people's cities and see people's like stories of cities. I've seen some are just like, oh, like they are doing the thing that I wanted, which is kind of having a history of their own city, right? They're like, oh, here it is at the end, and like I did all this because that happened, and these different things came in. So that's been fun. I like I'm glad people, I don't know, are getting like a setting that we've put a lot of work into, but only given the player like these really pinhole views into with the events and the kind of flavor text. There's a lot of work, I guess, like behind the scenes, and it's interesting to see people like interpret that. Not I guess that sounds kind of bad. I'm enjoying seeing people interpret it in various ways. So.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, do you see Amberspire as having kind of a core story, or do you think that each player kind of writes their own story with their city?
No, there's not a core story. I think there's like even a way you could interpret, which I don't mean to, where Amberspire is the broad story of a city entering a golden age, which is how the game ends. But honestly, I think it's valid for the player to say this city is like beyond hope, like it's just not like working out, I can't like get anything done. That to me is like a valid ending, that is one that the player has to sort of decide for themselves. There's plenty of like stories of cities in the real world that have failed for one reason or another, right? And I like that the game can capture that, although it sort of only formally recognizes like you did really well and now your city is entered kind of a golden age. But no, besides that, it's more just like a setting and kind of a possibility space of people and events and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And as someone who obviously thinks a lot about how design can can accentuate or maybe like obscure a story, do you find that you enjoy approaching games as a storytelling medium in any sense, or do you more approach your design through like thinking about how each mechanic will work together and then the story is kind of grafted on after the fact?
I mean, I enjoy games that have like a story for sure. In my design style, yeah, it is typically like I'm creating elements that together produce a certain effect for the player. Now that I've like done two of those in kind of like a really strong way, it's been really interesting seeing people react. Some people are reacting very similarly to Amberspire as they did with the Banished Vault, and they're very different games.
Right.
And so I've been a little surprised to see that, and then mostly just from like, oh, I didn't expect like quite such a similar reaction. And I think part of it is it has. Sorry, there's a
No
loud
worries.
motorcycle driving by. It has a lack of, it doesn't quite prime the player to say like, here's a story you're going to experience, which I think is honestly something that maybe I would like to improve in my own design. But it has this sort of like, here's the world, here's the like position you're being put in. Either you are exploring solar systems and kind of fleeing and trying to manage this kind of resource management game, or you're building a city and you've got these random elements. But that's just sort of presented to you. I don't know if I would say flatly, but kind of like, here it is, right? And take whatever you want out of it. And so I see a lot of people take, like really wide responses out of the games, which I think is interesting. And also sometimes I don't know, maybe disheartening when people are like, I didn't mean Amberspire to be as difficult as the Banished Vault, and some people are saying it is that difficult, which I find to be interesting. Anyway, so my like design style is more assembling kind of parts of a whole and then letting the player sort of pick it up and turn it whichever way they want, if that metaphor kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think it's cool that you are telling these stories that eventually do get told with the games through, a mechanics-driven medium that can only be told through games.
Yeah, and I really like this, and this is coming out of like the board games that I like. I really like expressing certain things just mechanically, right? So the way certain dice in Amberspire are laid out with how they affect the weather, just how like buildings interact with each other, that kind of thing. Or even like the resources chosen for the game. I think there's 30 resources in the game, but I think we came up with probably like 50 and then like reoriented. And so what the resources mean, they have a specific meaning for me, which buildings they're at, what even some of the buildings do, because I think even the buildings get a little bit more abstract and kind of esoteric. All of that means something that I've tried to express not purely, I guess, right? But like mostly through the idea of like, here's the dice they have, here are the resources they produce. You can then make an interpretation, or the player can then make an interpretation thinking like, oh, I think this is what's happening at the necropolis or the salon, because all the buildings at the start are like, oh, the furnace, it makes metal and it makes brick, or it makes scrap, which is fine. But then you get to more buildings where it's not quite clear from the name or the design. But my goal is that if you think about it long enough, or maybe you just intuit, or you have a read, that the meaning becomes clear from all of the mechanical elements.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating way to uncover a story, and it also, it asks a certain level of investment from the player, which I think is really important, particularly when we enter. I don't know, I feel like we're in an era where there's kind of like games you can just play while watching TV, and there are some games that like feel kind of like you're not getting everything out of it if you try to do that and try to multitask. And I really find that, like, at least for me, like focusing singularly on a game to get the most out of it is when I can tell the design is like coherent and well done. And so
that's great. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, right. I was wondering, like, specifically, you mentioned potentially being disheartened, but also just surprised by the fact that folks are kind of conflating Amberspire and the Banished Vault, or at least thinking they're more similar than than they are. Why do you think that is upon reflection? Do you think it's mainly like the dice and people see dice and they see potential difficulty and they're like, oh, like these are kind of cousins, or why do you think that is?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I would need, it's not even been a week since the game's out. So I'd probably need like, honestly, another 6 months to like really process everything.
Yeah.
I should say, like, I'm not disheartened that people are making specific reads, that it's more like, oh, it's more of a jump than what I was intending, which is, kind of fine and kind of how things go. But as for why people are reading more difficulty into it, it's, I don't know, it's interesting. I think the game presents certain things that appear more impactful than they are, but also it's not the, like for the weather, for example, I've seen some people stress, I guess, in the way it works for people who are listening who haven't played, is the player rolls some building dice to give you resources. Some of the results of a building die could instead add a weather dice to the next roll, the next weather roll. And after 3 of your building rolls, the world rolls all the weather dice you've accumulated, which moves the terrain tiles around the map, and those will do things that will kind of affect how you place your city. It won't like outright destroy a building, but it will, to a greater or lesser degree, change what you're going to have to do. And my goal and my kind of in how I've played it in myself, in my mind, it was like, oh, the weather is kind of like nudging you in certain directions, and maybe you have to change your plans a little bit, but it's just sort of like this little shaping system that's around you that you can't do 100%. You can't control 100% of.
Right.
And then I see, and then people are playing, and I'll see someone stressing over having like 3 weather die or something, and they're really strenuously avoiding the 4th. And then when I play, I'm not worried until I hit 10 or 12 or 15, yeah. And then it's like, okay, now I have to start changing what I'm doing. And so like there's that, and then the events can sometimes be quite punishing. Some of the systems some of the systems are very influential, and they present as a punishment to the player when they're not intended to be. And that's, I think, partly something that like maybe we didn't calibrate like how it's framed, right? But I think also I have seen some people pick it up and go, oh, this is like totally fine. I'm like enjoying it. They're picking it up the way I intended them to pick it up. And so I think it is almost the person's idea of what a city builder should be has really shaped how they approach Amberspire. And sometimes it is like, oh, someone who's very well versed in city builders, I've seen play it and go, oh, I actually really like what this is doing because it's so different. And then, or vice versa, someone really well versed in city builders will have a very difficult time because it's quite different from a traditional city builder. So I don't have a full answer yet, but that those are kind of the like strands that I'm chasing down to figure out why everyone is not everyone, why there's like quite a wide variety of responses.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear. And while we're on the subject, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind speaking to like community and indie game development from like 2 strands. One, interaction with folks who are playing, just people who buy it on Steam and pick it up. And interaction with other game devs. Like, how do you view community? Is it a big part of your process, or is it just something that you have to engage with as someone trying to make a product?
Yeah, I think as community with players, it's something that I'm not super comfortable being like having like a really engaged community, right? Like I've never done an early access development, that kind of thing. There's not like a specific reason for that necessarily. It's just like, this is the way we've sort of done it. And so we're going to keep kind of doing it that way. Yeah. But then as far as like community with devs, yeah, I think game developers all talk to each other all the time, mostly because we have a very strange job that doesn't relate to many other jobs. So yeah, it becomes, I would say like, that level of community is pretty important, mostly just to have people who are experiencing the same problems that you are experiencing, or sharing information about other folks around for good or bad, right?
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering, coming back to the concept of like rolling dice and randomness,
Hmm.
I was thinking about Amberspire in the context of like limitation in design,
Mm-hmm.
and how, like dice in particular represent randomness, but it's this limited form of randomness that can kind of
Yeah.
only be so random, for lack of a better term. And I was wondering, like, how do you view, particularly when it comes to independent game design and kind of making a game with a smaller scope and a smaller budget, um, do limitations ever like help you find flow, in terms of like scoping and design, or are they mostly just like practical elements?
A little bit of both. I don't really ascribe to the like flow model of like player experience. I'm more thinking about the amount of information a player is holding in their head and the amount of new information like being produced by the game for the player, right? So these are termed in like complexity or specificity, and like I have a loose way I describe it is like a horizon of knowledge, right?
Mm.
So a reason that the Banished Vault is very difficult is because it gives you a lot of information. When you arrive in a new solar system, you see 80-90% of what you will need to do to like solve the solar system, right?
Mm.
The dice rolls in that game, which are like hazards. So when you travel a ship through a certain area, you have to roll some dice and you'll lose something if you fail the roll, right? When the player is making a plan for how they're going to solve a solar system, their horizon kind of stops at the dice roll because they'll go, okay, well, if I succeed, then I'll do this. And if I don't succeed, I'll do that. But you can't plan too many steps past that because then you're like holding two versions of the plan. And then that quickly just overwhelms your brain.
Mm.
But the game gives you a lot to do before that. And so it puts in these little checks to sort of hem you in, from a kind of an information point of view. Amberspire is like the complete opposite, obviously, because you're rolling dice constantly.
Mm.
Every minute of the game, you're rolling dice, basically. And my goal with that was to kind of just go in the opposite direction and go, right, okay, so if you're going to roll dice, really what you probably should just do is just kind of pick some buildings that you sort of want their resources, roll, decide what you may want to do with those, and kind of keep going and let yourself flow in the current a little bit more. And that's not the traditional city builder model, which is very, I'm going to put this district here, this road here, and then do exactly these things. And so I kind of like engage in the system. But that's partly what I wanted for a bunch of different reasons. And so the bounded randomness, like you only roll so many dice per turn, and each die only ever has 3 to 5 results on it for resources, right, for like making a plan. And that is all to say, like, right, you can't plan all that much in the short term, but over the course of 10 turns, you'll see your plans kind of come together and go, right, this isn't exactly what I had in mind, but I still put this building here, and then these happened, and so on and so forth. And that's the kind of goal with the dice themselves, is kind of this driving element for the player's engagement.
Yeah, I really enjoy hearing you kind of talk through the specific, implications of using dice in these scenarios. And it kind of, I guess, hearing you talk about it leads me to my next question as far as like envisioning an audience when designing games. Do you do that, or do you make them kind of mainly along these mechanically pleasing lines to your brain and then kind of smooth them out for the commercial product side of it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, to some degree. I'm making the games to sell them to make money so that I can continue having a job, right? So
Right.
I would love to be able to tell you no and then just have like idle wealth, right? But yeah,
Yeah.
I am, but it's also, it kind of is a co-equal part of what the other elements are, right? and I guess we also kind of arrive at that audience point from a bunch of different angles. So from the beginning, we knew it was going to be a dice game. So we're like, okay, we need to be very upfront with that so that people who have like, very negative preconceived notions of dice or randomness just know that it's not secret. It's not secretly a dice game, which would not be great. And it was also going to be a science fantasy game, and so that was like a calculated decision. I like science fantasy, but also we've seen a lot of city builders that are set in vaguely 1400s to 1800s Europe, right? Which is, we don't need another one of those. Or it's, even from like a cold marketing point of view, how do you stand out? If an Amberspire dice was like, oh, do you roll some wheat and some sheep and some, that kind of thing, I think it would, it would lose something, or at least it would lose something for me.
Sure.
And then after that, like we kind of figure out these like broad elements, but once you get into what's the overall shape of the game, it becomes much more like, okay, what exactly is happening moment to moment, right? And that's where it sort of takes over and doesn't become so much like an idealized player. I suppose that's like really self-evident from the variability of responses as well, right?
Sure. Yeah. And I don't know, like, it's as fascinating to me if the answer was like yes or no from the variability of responses side, just because it seems like people will say whatever they want and everyone's different. So
yeah, definitely.
It's hearing you describe that kind of design process led me to wanting to hear more about like the team structure that you're working within.
Sure.
What was kind of the team on Amberspire like?
Yeah, so I was basically the only full-time person for the entirety of the project. At the studio, there's 3 other people who are doing like production and marketing, basically, which are extremely important.
Yeah.
And then for the Banished Vault and Amberspire, we brought in artists and musicians and writers as needed throughout the project to like do their discipline. And all of the code is written by me, and then the design is like mostly me in the sense that there's 20 other people at some point in the game giving feedback or doing notes or being like, oh no, we should definitely do this for these reasons, right? So I hesitate to say like I'm the designer when it's like me and the ghosts of 24 other people, but yes, that's the like broad structure basically.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I was wondering, what does the broader apparatus of like Bithell Games look like right now? I'm just like, because I know there's a specific imprint that you work within potentially like under it. So I if there's anything you have to say about that, I'd be interested, but I'm not sure.
No, it's honestly, it's a lot simpler than it looks. The straightforward reason is that like, there's a guy named Mike Bithell who owns the company and makes games. We created the label Lunar Division for me to begin with, but it was not like my label, mostly as a like, here are games not made by Mike but made by us, just because when someone's name is on it, you inevitably get the attachment, and we just wanted to avoid that. And it's weirdly worked too well, because now people are like, wait, how does this even work? Like, do you work there? And I'm like, I still work there. It's just kind of a different name. It's not that like it just means, it's not a mic directed game. That's like the entirety of the definition of Lunar Division. It's not my games. It's not like bizarre strategy games or anything like that.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. If you could give some advice to an aspiring game designer, what would it be?
Boy, I don't know. That's a really hard question to answer, because game design is such a broad thing, right? To go from making a TTRPG to working at a AAA studio or making an indie video game to working at like Wizards of the Coast, which would be like AAA card games, I guess, right?
Yeah.
That experience is very, very wide, and so it kind of depends what you want to do, and like the advice is to think seriously about what you want to do, because I think the games industry and like game design teaching are very narrow windows into like what a game is, right? And even like what the popular discourse of games on Blue Sky on any given day doesn't remotely reflect like what people are actually playing in the country or in the world or
Right.
in a certain school somewhere, right? And I think it's easy to get caught up in like, to make a game is to make an indie platformer or an RPG that looks a certain way or whatever. And as far as like the broadest advice I could say is like, you don't have to do that. You can kind of do whatever you want. And a game can be a lot of different things. So it's it's good to broaden your horizons beyond top 20 on Steam or whatever, right? And also play some
Yeah.
board games.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I was going to ask in the context of that answer, which I thought was really insightful, like, do you view, and I think I kind of know the answer from our initial questions of like, how did you get into games? Like, do you view like indie video games as like the medium that you desire to work in, or do you more view it as like a means to make games and you're more fascinated in just making any kind of game that you can make? Like, what is the kind of Nick reason for being in it?
Oh yeah, well the reason I make games is because I can't help myself. I over the past few years I've made some analog card games that are like, there's a format called a micro game, which is just 18 cards, and the entire game fits on the 18 cards. And so I've done 4 of those, and I'm working on like a TTRPG right now. And all of those come about because that's just like, I have an idea I can't really shake, and I want to do it. So I'm lucky in that I have a full-time job to make indie games, and that's why I'm talking to you. But otherwise, like, I would still be doing things anyway.
Yeah,
So it is more of like, I just like the idea of games generally.
that's beautiful. I think it's all the more reason why folks listening should check out Amberspire and all your offerings, because I think it's like, particularly today, it almost seems like there's more folks than ever trying to get into it because, there's this idea that they could maybe make money, but like the best games are made by people who really want to just be there and would make them anyway. And I
Yeah.
definitely see that reflected in Amberspire. I know you mentioned that you don't have as much of an interface with the like community of players as some indie devs do. That said, I was wondering if you could kind of deliver a message to all the folks who are browsing those games on Steam or like looking for something to play, or just game players at large. Do you wish that they could be privy to or know something more about like the devs who make those games, or do you not really care?
Um,
Like,
I
what
don't
would the
know.
message be to them if you could say it? And it's fine to say, nothing.
I it's funny because this is sort of like a weird like meta message, I guess. Usually the reason a game is doing something there's usually a good reason a game is doing something in a certain way.
Mm,
And I think a lot of what devs talk about is like, look at this person on Steam saying, why don't you do X, Y, and Z, when I think 1 out of 1 billion times that is something that didn't occur to the developer. And usually, like, well, there's like it's money or it's resources or time or engine limitations or whatever. And I guess broadly, like games are extremely complicated, like systems and like computer programs, right? And it's very I don't know how to sum this up, but it's like I guess is we already thought of that and we couldn't fix it. It's like the long and short answer. Yeah, I don't know if that's like a specific takeaway, but that is a common theme to a lot of like dev to dev conversations of people just don't, like it's hard to explain why something is the way it is, but there's definitely a good reason.
Yeah, definitely. I recently just like made my first like Twine game and put it on itch, and it really like gave me so much empathy for the folks I'm talking to, because even something that's like, you click through it in 10 minutes, like they're just collages I made with like Photoshop for the art, and it's like it had my head like spinning about like, oh my gosh, like if I ship it like this, it's not working in this platform and that, and it's like, wow, something with, pretty much every game has more interaction than that. And so it's amazing what folks like you do. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today, Nick. It was awesome talking to you.
Thanks for having me on.
And that was Nick. I really appreciate them taking the time out of their very busy kind of release week schedule to chat with me. Amberspire came out almost a week ago from when we were recording this episode, and by the time it's out, just a couple weeks back. And the best thing you can do to support Nick and all of their game design thoughts and obvious mastery, is to go check it out on Steam. It's a super fun dice-based city builder, and you can experience those mechanics that Nick and I discussed firsthand for a very low price right now. So go check it out, support Nick and all the wonderful work that they are doing. For the spiel this week, I have been floored by the wonderful way that Slay the Spire 2 has allowed me to stay in touch with old friends. I'm in Seattle right now, and most of my friends are in the East Coast, and chatting with them just while playing Slay the Spire 2. Some have never played Slay the Spire, some are seasoned players with hundreds of hours in the game, and both experiences are wonderful just because, while, you do kind of have to be locked in and make some tough decisions. It's like, especially if folks have played it before, it's pretty, in flow type of activity, and you can catch up and just have it be a thing that you're doing together. And that's been such a blessing these days. Interacting with people really brings me a lot of energy. And so doing that with friends has been awesome. I would highly recommend, getting Slay the Spire 2 and particularly trying out the multiplayer mode, which is really fleshed out and a wonderful addition to my life as someone who likes to keep up with folks across many thousands of miles in different time zones. So if you have someone like that in your life, I would highly recommend it. The only other thing I will mention this week is I have gotten back into reading, and reading is awesome, and it really makes my brain feel the best it feels. Just putting my phone in a drawer, going to a cafe, or just downstairs to kind of the sunny porch table and reading for a couple hours. And the way that I have kind of tricked my brain into having the attention span for reading again, because it was something that I was really worried I was losing in this age of screens, is using a pen and not only marking up my book with underlines and writing in the margins, but also keeping a commonplace journal, which is a place where you kind of write down quotes and wisdom from what you're reading. And it makes the activity feel a lot more like a two-way street, more like a conversation. And that's been a beautiful way for me to kind of re-engage with one of my favorite activities on earth. So if you find that you're playing a lot of games and want to get back into reading as well to find those stories, please do so. I would highly recommend marking up books with a pen. They shouldn't be precious objects. They should be objects of conversation and hubs of connection that can kind of help you connect not only with the author, but with folks in your community. Talking about books is one of the best ways to do so. And keeping that commonplace journal really helps make you feel like you have some agency in what's going on. I've found that, like, at my least mentally healthy times, my brain is like, why are you reading when you could be creating something? You could be writing. You could be making a story, making a game. And I feel like that is so detrimental, because reading and synthesizing other people's perspectives, ideas, kind of filling our cup with these stories is the best thing we can do in a creative practice. One of the most worthwhile things to learn from the folks that have come before you and that are kind of defining themselves through kind of the rawest medium there is in kind of reading and writing. And so would highly recommend doing that, as I've said. And it could also be a fun way to engage with some of your favorite games. So I recently was talking to some game devs, and they were talking about their note-taking practices and how they kind of keep copious notes of the games they play, what they like about them, what they think could be improved. And so coming up with a note system and being in conversation with the pieces of art that you are that you're engaging with, I think is really healthy, and can certainly, for someone like me who feels creative but oftentimes doesn't know where to put that energy, it can really funnel that towards some really meaningful engagement. So that's the spiel for this week. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do tell one friend. I don't do anything to market the show. And that's all I've got for you this week. So see you next time. Bye.